further. All right.
Okay. Ani bonjour. Ojawanan kwe minwa Teddy Syrette nadishna kaz. Maigan nadodam obanjawad nadonjaba. Hello, Ani. Bonjour. Salut. My name is Yellow Star Woman. I sit in the Wolf Clan, and I'm originally from Batchewana First Nation. Grew up on Rankin Reserve here in Sault Ste. Marie, and I'm currently living in Sault Ste. Marie right now, so I'm back in my territory of Bawating, so it's very nice. I want to say thank you for all the folks who introduced yourselves earlier. I do have my grandmother's from Wikwemikong, so hey, Wiki folks, hi, how are you? Cousins, Nitais, hey, cousins, maybe? Okay. And my name is, my English name for tax purposes is Theodore Syrette, or folks know me as Teddy. And I identify as Two-Spirit, I'm a Nishnabek. And my background is in social work, theater, and bingo. And I currently work full-time as the Indigenous Liaison and Program Development Team for a national LGBTQ network called the Enchante Network. But before that, that's like my day job, and like my superpower job, my superhero thing is education, is edutainment. So, because my background is in social work, theater, and bingo. So, I'm a little bit sassy, and I don't care, and that's okay. And that's just how Creator made me, because growing up, for me, I was always trying to figure out what does it mean to be different? What does it mean to be a brown person? What does it mean to be Indigenous, First Nation? And also, what does it mean to be gay? Because if you didn't know, I'm a little fabulous. And I couldn't hide all this in a closet. I really tried. I didn't have any doors on my closet. So it was like walk in, walk out. And I walked out of that closet at a very young age. And when I was about 12 years old, I came out when I was 12. I couldn't hide that truth within me. And I knew that was a part of me that was really important. And I knew that hearing other stories, people would always talk about hiding, that maybe you didn't have to be that way. Maybe you can just change. Maybe you shouldn't be that different, because that being different isn't always accepted. It's not tolerated. Sometimes you're not loved or respected if you are too different. And for myself, I just knew that I was different, and I didn't want to hide anything about that, because there shouldn't be any shame on who you are if that is what your spirit is. Because when I was a young person, I took Ojibway class in elementary school. Mind you, when I was in elementary school, I thought I was Italian. Because my family didn't I was on the reserve, but we didn't have our culture. Like in my family, we never spoke the language at home. We never practiced our ceremonies, our traditions. But I was in Ojibwe class, and I thought I was Italian. And the first time I ever came out to my mom, I came out as being Italian, and I was really proud about it. I was like, "Mom, I'm Italian." She's like, "What do you mean?" I'm like, "Well, Shane, he's my best buddy, and he's got dark hair, and I got dark hair, and he's got brown skin, I got brown skin. He eats pasta, and I eat pasta, and I'm Italian." And she's like, that's not how that works. And you're native, you're Ojibwe, you're an Indian. And I'm like, okay. What does that mean? Because I thought I was Italian, and now you're telling me that I'm not. And she's like, well, we live on a reserve, and that's where Indians are forced to live. And we go to powwows, and sometimes we don't. And sometimes we smudge, and sometimes we don't. And there's a thing called residential schools. And if you have any more questions about being Native, you're going to have to ask somebody else. So I'm like, oh, okay. So luckily, I did have some very informative aunties. And my grandmother was one of the founding members of the Indian Friendship Center here in Sault Ste. Marie. So I remember going to her to a lot of community events. And that's probably what got me into social work, or getting into volunteering and giving back to community, because she always instilled that into us and to her grandchildren and her children, to give back. No matter if you have a little bit, it can be enough for someone else. Whether that's giving back your time, making some tea, making some fry bread for folks who need it, giving somebody an ear to listen to. And not giving them all the solutions, or not trying to find the solutions for them. Sometimes people just need to share their story to somebody who's willing to hear it. and somebody who's willing to not judge that story or to question that story. And that was the one thing too. And I was like, I think I'm gay when people are telling me, Teddy, I think you're gay. And I'm like, I don't even know what that means. Like, what does that mean? They're like, Teddy, you're a homo. I'm like, what does that mean? They're like, it's homosexual. It's like when two guys like each other. I'm like, oh, I think I know what you mean. Because I have those feelings when I watch Zach Morris on Saved by the Bell. And in my opening, I'm 34 winters old. I like that. I'd always say that I was 29 plus 5. I still can't let go of those late 20s. I don't know why. It wasn't a good year anyways. But yeah, so for me coming out, I came out when I was very young. And when kids were telling me, Teddy, you're a homosexual, I had to figure out what that word was. And I couldn't just ask my parents what that term meant. And I grew up in the age that we didn't have Facebook, we didn't have Google. The only internet we had was dial-up. Even my dad didn't even understand internet. I remember he was a custodian at the band office on the reserve, and I remember one day he came home with a computer, and he's like Bear. He used to call me Bear. He's like, Bear, I got a computer. And I'm like, where did you get this? Like, we were poor. And I was like, this is expensive. Like, computers are really expensive. How did you get this? And he's like, oh, well, I think they're just sitting there. So I just took one. I'm like, Dad, I think you have to bring it back. He's like, no, they don't even count them. I'm like, whatever, Dad. And he's like, shut. He's like, set it up, my boy. So I set up the computer, and he's like, okay, now turn on the internet. And I'm like, Dad, that's like a whole separate thing. And he's like, oh, okay, well, never mind. And so even then, we didn't have the internet at home. So I found the term homosexual in books, because that was the one thing that helped me learn. And that because I was a natural social worker, my mom always said that I was probably going to be a social worker or a cop because I asked so many questions. And because she didn't have the answers, I had to find those answers somewhere else. And if it wasn't with my aunties or my grandmother or teachers, it was through books. And the one book I was able to find the term homosexual in was in HIV/AIDS resource books. So, and you have to understand, like, I'm 12, 13 years old. I'm reading this information. I don't even know much about sex. I don't know about condoms, but I was learning about the impacts of HIV and the impacts it had on gay people and the LGBTQ community, because it was a pandemic. It was a virus that had a lot of different stigmas related to. Before it even had the name human immune deficiency virus, people were just clarifying it as gay pneumonia, because most of the people who were sick and dying of that disease were gay men. And that took a lot of time for people to get behind and to get more supports and research for it. And people were dying because no one cared, because they were gay. Because we didn't have a lot of supportive resources. We didn't have access to gay prides or gay straight alliances. The term two-spirit really didn't exist until like 1990. And when it came to the term two-spirit, for myself, I know I'm kind of jumping all over the place, but just bear with me. It's like a game of bingo, right? And eventually we'll get to a jackpot. You'll just be waiting for your number. Anyways. So when I was coming out, and before I learned the term two-spirit was through theater, and that's the one thing that really was my saving grace. That was the one outlet that I had growing up, because when I knew I was gay, I came out, and I really didn't know what could happen once I'm out, because once you're out as something, it's really hard to go back in, and that can be as coming out as a gay person, it can be coming out as trans, it can be coming out as an Indigenous person. There are still folks who can see me as being Indigenous sometimes. There are still folks who are like, oh, I didn't think you were Indigenous. And I'm like, well, what do you mean by that? And it's like, oh, because you speak so differently. And I'm like, well, what does an Indigenous person sound like? How many conversations have you had with an Indigenous person? Probably not many. If you're able to have a conversation with me because I sound like you, I don't know if that's the case, because if that sounds pretty racist. And that's like that diet racism, or that racism like that racists or people who have racist behavior don't know they have. So, and for me, they didn't know who I was. They didn't know about the term homosexual. They just knew about that stigma. They just knew about it being a bad thing. And that's the one thing, when it comes to homophobia and transphobia or racism or hatred, we're not born homophobic. We're not born transphobic. We're not born racist. We're not born hateful. We learn that. People teach that along the way. And those teachings can be really hard for some people if they're experiencing, if that's who they are, if that's a part of their truth, that that hurt is a part of their truth. And that was the one thing for me, understanding that if I was going to come out, that I was going to have to be hurt. And fortunately now there's a lot of people who don't have those situations. It's a lot more easier. There's a lot more resources. A lot more people are asking those questions. More people are working on tolerance and respect and acceptance. Because with my work, with my private work, when I was living down in Toronto and for the past 7 years, it was going to different communities and talking about what does it mean to be gay and what does it mean to be Indigenous, and what are like the barriers that Indigenous people face, and also what are the barriers and challenges that an LGBTQ person faces. And then when you can start combining those together, how hard can it be or challenging for somebody who is Indigenous and LGBTQ? If they're on racialization, if they're brown or if they're Black or if they're Indigenous and they're Asian or what have you, no matter, that is also another part of themselves. So part of my work is talking about our own truths and realizing who we are that makes us who we are. And with some of the earliest teachings that I received in Ojibwe class from my Anishinaabe elder, Willard Pine from Garden River First Nation, was that everybody has gifts and everybody has a purpose. And it doesn't matter how different we are or how similar we are, we all have a purpose. And we have helpers. The Creator gives us those purposes and our gifts and our helpers before we even get to this world. And it's up for us to continue on with that journey so we can try and figure out, so that journey can be lighter for us. And that journey was lightened for me because I had a two-spirit auntie. And I had a grandmother that was accepting of who I was. She didn't quite fully understand my difference, but she knew that that it was important that I was different. But other kids weren't accepting that. I didn't have that acceptance for a very long time. And it was really hard when that acceptance is not coming from the community you're part of, but when it's coming from your own community. Because I was seeing other LGBTQ people, there's like that joke, like I have gaydar. I think I really had gaydar because I saw other gay people in my community and I saw how other people were treating them. And that didn't make any sense because even if they didn't understand the purpose, those teachings, they had other teachings of like the 7 grandfather teachings or the 7 sacred teachings of love, respect, of like being brave for stepping up for other people. So being humble and practicing humility when you don't know all those answers, because we don't know all the answers. But we know that we can be kind. We know that we can be gentle. And we have to be gentle with ourselves and we have to be gentle with others. And if we don't know that information, then we have to make that time to find that information, whether it's through books, whether it's through Google searches. That's the other thing too, is like, I need help with the acronym. I'm like, you can Google that. I'm not having a conversation about LGBTQ acronym. Like there's resources out there. And if you want to ask the question, then let's talk about my rate. Because it's also a lot of emotional labor, right? Because it is very personal. And with my work, and when it came to the term two-spirit, I found that term two-spirit through theater. So that was an outlet for me to express myself where I didn't have to be worried about being bullied for being gay or native or brown, because I can be whoever I needed to be in that stage, working in a community, picking up a lot of skills, learning leadership, learning teamwork, learning presentation, learning like working in a fast-paced dynamic, thinking on your toes. That's what theater taught me. And it didn't matter if I was gay or not, we all had a role and we had a purpose and we were all working towards the same goal. And for theater, I was able to find myself even more through that outlet. And when I was 19, I was doing Indigenous theater, and I was kind of very weary about just working with all Indigenous people because I really didn't know what it meant to be Indigenous. Like I started to go to more powwows, I started smudging a bit more, I started paying more attention to Ojibwe class and trying to go to more community events, but I was a still pretty shy person. Like I'm still a very shy person. I'm 34 years old and I'm a shy person, and that's okay. But for me, at a very 19 years old, theater didn't make me shy. And Indigenous theater, when I was 19, it gave me my first paying opportunity as an artist to do theater and something that I loved, working with other youth, working with other Indigenous people. And then finding out shortly later that a lot of those Indigenous artists, producers, directors were also gay. And it was a non-Indigenous professor at Brock University, who was a professor, Margot Francis, who said, Teddy, when I'm watching you on stage, when I'm seeing you play Iago, what gender are you? And I'm like, I don't know. because I'm not thinking about my gender. I'm just trying to think about what the next line is. There's a lot of lines in this play. So my gender, what I have in my pants, is the last thing I'm thinking about. And she's like, well, and I see that. And it's beautiful because I can't tell if your character is male or female. And it doesn't matter because you're just telling the story. And I'm like, and yeah. And then she told me the term two-spirit. She's like, do you know the term two-spirit? And I'm like, no, what does it mean? And she's like, that's when you can be gay and trans or queer and native at the same time. And I said, you can't, not here, not in my territory. Do you know these people? Have you met my chief? Have you met some of these elders? Like, they're not cool. Like, I hang out with theater because it's off reserve because some of those homophobic people are on my reserve. They're leadership. These are elders who are telling me that I couldn't be it. Because at 15 years old, we're going to a community powwow. We're going to Rankin powwow. And I was told by my friend, traditional family member from the traditional family here in the community, saying that, Teddy, you can go to powwow, but you just can't be a part of it. You can't dance, you can't sing, you can't drum, you can't wear regalia. I'm like, well, why not? Like, I don't already do that, but I think maybe I would like to, maybe someday. And she said, you can't be it because you're gay. Because my family tells me that gay people can't be a powwow. And they can't be in regalia, and they can't drum, and they can't be in ceremony. And I was like, well, that doesn't make sense. What about kindness? What about love? What about respect? What about purpose? What about gifts? What about helpers? What you're saying right now doesn't make sense. And she's like, but that's just what my truth is. And she came from a very religious family. Is that a cat? I love cats. Sorry, I got distracted easily. Squirrels. And I was like, well, why? And so I didn't really know. So I was really confused, and I was really hurt, and I was really angry. Very dramatic. I was very angry because I felt like I had to make a choice, that I had to make a choice of either being gay or being native. And I didn't know much about being native, but I had books, and I had different movies, and I had my auntie to tell me that I can still be gay, and that was okay. And I was meeting other gay people, and they were okay too. And if they were okay, then I was going to be okay with them, and I wasn't going to hide myself. So I denounced who I was for being native for quite a while. When I was 15 to like 19 years old, I cut up my status card. I told people I was Italian. I lived on the commute. I lived in the neighborhood beside Rankin. I wasn't native if I couldn't be both, because I didn't want to hide that part of myself. But it was when I was 19 and I met other Indigenous two-spirit artists doing their thing, living their truth, fighting that fight, because they fight that fight too sometimes. And I was like, if you can do it, then maybe I can do it too. But at the same time, there's a lot of kids who are dying. And in the media, there was a lot of kids dying of suicide for being LGBT, for being lesbian, gay, bisexual, and trans. And I was very hurt by it. And I was living in Wakwemekong. I was studying at the Bajmajig Theater Group and Manitowaning. So I was there, and there was a kid, and there was a youth who was like within the community or nearby who passed away after they came out. And it hurt, because I was so tired of seeing those names and those ages, because those ages kept on getting younger and younger, like 18, 16, 15, 12, 8, 9 years old kids dying of suicide, dying of violence because of their differences. And that's unacceptable. And it really hurt when it hit so close to home. And I didn't know that family, and I didn't know that person, but I knew that story. And I started thinking about the kids in my community and what needed to be done here in Sault Ste. Marie. Because when I was younger, we had an LGBT youth group, but that kind of fizzled out, how some movements go. Unfortunately, that's just the case. So I reached out to Sault Ste. Marie, to all the queer folks I knew. I'm like, hey, what's going on in Sault Ste. Marie? There needs to be something. And no one got to me. And I'm like, okay, did I piss all these gay people off? Because sometimes that happens, which is okay. But then they're like, no, Teddy, we didn't respond because there's nothing here. I'm like, okay, well, something needs to be done. So I dropped out of theater, and I went back to Sault Ste. Marie, and I studied social work in Native Specialization at Sault College. And within that time, I got in touch with the Gay Straight Alliance there at Sault College. So we started that movement there in the college and in that post-secondary institution. But then we also started to get more movement in the community itself. So there was somebody wanted to do a parade, a float in the community day parade. So we said, okay, so we did it. And there's a lot of comments, and a lot of people thought we shouldn't be there. And a lot of people said, yes, we should be there. And I think we should have been there because we started off with like maybe 50 people, like 40 or 50, like 50 or 60 people. And we ended up with one of the biggest groups because there were people who were late and then people joined us and walked with us for the rest of the parade. And that was great. And shortly after that, we started Sioux Pride here in Sault Ste. Marie. This year, this year would have been their seventh year celebration. Unfortunately, they postponed it till next year because of COVID, but they still have signs. So I have a sign on my balcony right now in my apartment. This is Sioux Pride Fest, Sault Ste. Marie. So it is that little sign of solidarity that we are still here and there are supports. And with my work, with storytelling and with theater, because theater taught me how to facilitate conversation. So that's what I do in my private practice, is I go and do workshops with kids and teachers and elders and community members. So even that elder who taught me that everyone has a purpose in elementary school, he took my workshop. And when it came to pronouns, my pronouns are they, them, he, him, she, her, because like my name is Yellow Star Woman. I had an elder who said that your name is attached to stars, because some stars are genderless and some stars are gender fluid, so they can move from masculine to feminine. And that's what I see in you, and that's what the spirits are telling me what your name is. So if I'm feeling that feminine energy, if I'm feeling that femaleness, a part of my spirit, he said you can add kwe or woman at the end of your name. And if you don't feel that femaleness of your spirit, then you can just be Ojibways. You can just be Yellow Star. And that's a very great example when I'm working with kids, because sometimes if you follow me on Instagram, Danny, call her right out. If you follow me on Instagram, you can see me in different like variations of like gender fluidity where I am masculine and sometimes more feminine. So it's great. So sometimes when I'm teaching young kids, when we're doing like theater workshops and we're talking about storytelling, sometimes I'm wearing a skirt and I'm wearing jewelry and I'm wearing earrings and a 5 o'clock shadow, because I don't like shaving all that much. And I was like, okay, before we start, I'm going to ask who has questions about why that man is wearing a dress. And all their little hands go up. I'm like, okay, I'm going to teach you about my name, and then maybe that'll give you a little bit of an understanding. And a lot of them understand that. So then they're like, okay, so does that make sense why that man is wearing a dress? And they're like, yeah, okay. It's like, okay, now who's ready for some storytelling? And they're like, I'm like, okay, the hard part is over. Now let's get into character work. But I wouldn't have had that kind of information if I didn't have those helpers along the way. So once I heard that term two-spirit, like the term homosexual, I had to do my research. So I had to find other elders. So I had to find people like Albert McLeod of the Two-Spirited of Manitoba, Two-Spirited People of Manitoba Incorporated. And they've been in practice for 30 years. And they were part of the first organizations that held the first Two-Spirit gathering, the first Two-Spirit national gathering in Manitoba 30 plus years ago. And at those gatherings, that's where that term two-spirit, an elder by the name of Myra Laramie. So she's a knowledge keeper, Anishinaabe knowledge keeper in Manitoba. She's still alive today. I was able to see her in January at a two-spirit gathering in Toronto, which was really lovely. But she always shares that teaching. She always shares that vision of why it was given to her. And around that time too, that there was a lot of Indigenous people who were still being impacted by HIV, who were also gay, who weren't able to go back home. Sometimes their families just totally banished them and they had to find other families. And all those families were LGBTQ Indigenous people. And a lot of times we were tired of using terms like homosexual or bisexual labels that were not ours, that were not Indigenous to us, because for many of us, we had our own names. We had our teachings, we had those ceremonies in place that were not taken away from us, that were not impacted by colonialism and replaced with homophobia and transphobia practices. So, and a lot of people discuss that at that gathering. Nish Manaduk, two spirits, like a literal meaning of two spirits, a balance between maleness and femaleness, a fluidity between masculinity and femininity, but also that cultural and spiritual practice. Like it also has that meaning, it's a fluidity between the spirit world and the physical world. Because for some two-spirited folks in some communities and some cultures, two-spirited people are seen as like spirit, like a definite of the spirit helpers in a way. And like almost be having a direct conduit in some cases. If you look at some teachings, and that was another person who I found, a helper of mine, Harlan Pruden. He runs a two-spirit journal, and he documents and he researches two-spirit identities and what that queerness could have looked like for Indigenous histories. And within his work has found like 150 items of Two-Spirit instances from right across Turtle Island. And some of them existed before contact. Some of them were created after contact because of influences of colonization. So even some of the languages used to describe Indigenous people who are queer or trans is not necessarily ours, but was labels that were used. And for that term, Nishminaduk, it was an Indigenous term. Now it's an Anishinaabeg term, but other folks who are not Indigenous can also use that term as a placeholder until they can find the language, or until that language is returned to their communities. And they can, and then those teachings can also follow as well. So, and even that you've seen like that growth in language happen too for Two-Spirit folks, because there are some people who are so adamant, like, well, I don't like that term Two-Spirit, or that's an Anishinaabeg term, and I'm not Anishinaabeg, so I need something else, but I don't have anything else, so I need something else that's not Anishinaabeg, that's not Two-Spirit, but that's something that's Indigenous to me. And then you start seeing the term indigiqueer is highly used now too by a lot of folks who don't want to use the term Two-Spirit, because sometimes Two-Spirit also carries those ceremonial and spiritual roles and communal roles that comes attached to it sometimes. And some people don't want to claim that for themselves. And that's totally okay too. It all depends on how people are comfortable with that term, using that research, by asking those questions, finding those helpers who are out there. You just have to do the work. And I've been doing this work for a long time, so I don't expect the people to know everything that I know, but I always expect people to try to take something out of this, of like just taking something that I hear and like maybe thinking about it later on. And with some of my conversations, people get hurt, or people get angry, or people feel shame, or they feel guilt. And that's okay, because that just makes you human. It's what you do after those feelings. What do you need to do afterwards? Do you need to watch a movie? Do you need to put down your tobacco? Do you need to smudge? Do you need to call that Two-Spirited person in your life and tell them that you love them? And tell them that you'll always be a safe place for them. And if we had more of that, then we wouldn't lose more of our folks. And not just through like violence or through suicide, but when folks leave their community to find a safer community elsewhere. I hear that from aunties and uncles all the time. It's like, if my so-and-so, if my niece and my nephew just gets to Toronto or Winnipeg or Vancouver or Montreal, there'll be a village there for them. And I always have to remind them that in those villages, they're not always safe either, because some of those villages have racist people. Sometimes if someone's trans, there's transphobic people who are also gay. So that lateral violence also exists too. So again, looking at those similarities between cultures and groups. Like, we might not understand what it means to be gay, but we can understand what it means to be Indigenous. And we might not understand what it means to be Indigenous, but we might understand what it means to be gay and what that culture, what history can look like, because it's very reflective. And when it comes to Canada, Canada was never built for Indigenous people. Canada wasn't built for Two-Spirit, LGBTQ people, or women, or children, or elders. Canada was never built for us. So sometimes those systems have to be rebuilt, and they have to be fought. Because if we don't fight, then what can we lose? And I already know so many people that we've lost, and I wish they were here. But if we can be kind, then we don't have to lose anymore. So I think with that, I'll just leave it at that. So, are there any questions or any comments? I'll drink some water.
Okay, so if anybody has questions, they can ask them. If not, I mean, there are a few other questions. I'll start with mine, actually.
Okay.
Or the ones. Okay, so I think we kind of heard why you think the work that you do is important, just from all of that. So we'll go for, do you have a message for Two-Spirit youth who are in the process of finding out more about who they are?
I think for the one thing for me, when I was 15 and I first came out, I was like, we need more supports. We need training, we need education, we need gay people in our schools, we need gay people in our band offices. We need to make sure that we're safe everywhere we go. But this was like in like the late 90s. So there is still like not a lot of movement happening in Sault Ste. Marie. And some of that movement's still not happening in a lot of places today. So it's a lot of times, it's just a matter of patience. And just trying to fight as much as possible, try to cope as much as possible. So for me, I still find value in art. So whether that's writing, whether that's listening to music, whether it's supporting Two-Spirit artists and Two-Spirit media, which is some great, and there's some great information out there if you can get that shared with different youth or if you have access to it. So I know, what is it? Red Rising magazine. So like in they have a Two-Spirit issue. So there's all the content, poems, stories, art, photography are all done by Two-Spirited people. I work for a national LGBTQ network, but we're funded, but there's also another national Two-Spirit organization called Two Spirits in Motion. So with them, they're a national Two-Spirit organization that's right across Canada. They have board members from right across Canada who are Two-Spirit or queer or Indigenous people who identify as LGBTQ. The awesome thing about them too is that they try to run as much as possible from an Indigenous lens to incorporate Indigenous processes within their foundation. So with their board, they have 2 advisory councils. So the one advisory council are run by elders. So I think Lorraine Blue Waters, Ed LaValle, Mani Chikabi from Thunder Bay. So they're elders that all sit on that panel, and they're all Two-Spirit as well. And I've worked with many of them as well. And the other advisory council is youth. So they have a national Two-Spirit youth advisory council that meets regularly, and they'll help advise their board to make sure that their journey is going in the right way. So there are supports out there. There are definitely a lot more supports now than there are. It's great to see that one of my dreams is to see either prides or gay straight alliances or safe spaces in First Nations communities and agencies right across Turtle Island. But that takes the work of allies and LGBTQ folks working hand in hand together. And sometimes that means a lot of learning. So that times, if you want to practice allyship, if you wanted to be an ally after this little presentation, I'm very sorry, I'm all out of buttons. Like I ran out of buttons, so I can't give you your Two-Spirit button ally. You're gonna have to work a little bit hard for it. And that's the one thing when it comes to allyship. If you want to practice allyship for Two-Spirit LGBTQ folks, allies, you have to remember, you can't be an allyship is not a Monday to Friday job. Allyship is not 9 to 5. You can't just say, okay, I'm an ally for Two-Spirit people, and then on Friday nights you're a horrible person. No, I'm not saying you're a horrible person, but that's the factor sometimes. Sometimes it's just a label. Sometimes it's just a poster. Sometimes it's just a button. So the one thing I always encourage, that before your posters, I want to see your policies. I want to know what your procedures are. I want to see what your bylaws are. I want to see if I'm included, if I see myself represented in the language in your flyers, in your forms. Put another box. Just put another box. Like, oh my God, just give me the choice of letting me choose what my friggin' sex is. And why do you need to know what's in my pants? Like, how is that detrimental to your data? Why is that still detrimental to your data? It's funny because like I used to travel a lot. So every time you have to check in what sex you are. So I had a question. I was like, okay, Air Canada. I tweeted them. I was like, Air Canada, how come you want to know what's in my pants? You stopped giving away nuts a long time ago. So why do you want to know if I got them or not? I'm sorry if you're putting this on YouTube. If this totally screws up your video, then oops. But because I never understood, like, why is that? And then somebody who worked in aviation, they're like, oh, it's because it's based on weight. I'm like, okay, explain this a little bit more. They're like, well, we take the average size male and the average size female, so we make sure that we put them on the right part of the plane so the plane doesn't get lopsided. I'm like, okay, but what's like the average size male and an average size female? Because like, you don't even know if someone's checking. Because like I know some very like bodacious ladies, and I know some very petite fellas. So what is what is average? So it's like, really, you kind of need like a weight scale. So like someone choose like in between, like what's their weight? So you don't even need to know what gender they are. And then they said, it was funny, like, but Teddy, don't you think that asking somebody's weight is pretty personal? And I'm like, you're asking me what's in my pants. So it's not like you can get other data that's like not gender specific. And they're like, oh yeah, I guess so. So sometimes it's like simple things like that. And like, even if you work in an agency and if you have like 2 washrooms, if you have a building if you have just 2 washrooms and there's no urinals in them and they both lock and they're just like 1-person washrooms, you can just change the signs. And congratulations, you have gender neutral or unisex washrooms. hey, that's a step. You can you can put that on a poster. And if I saw that on a poster, I'm like, hey, there's unisex washrooms here. I know I can pee or paddle in either of these places and I'll be okay. And I'll just have to remember to wash my hands. That's the one thing. When it comes to washrooms, just wash your hands. Like just do what you need to do, wash your hands. And like that's so when it comes to youth, be patient, ask for help. I wish there was more help for me because there is more help there too. And there are a lot of different agencies. So like if you're in Ontario, LGBT Youth Line, so they're a resource that youth can who are LGBTQ who can outreach to. So it's kind of like Helpline, like Canada's Helpline or Youth Line. Yeah, Canada's Helpline. But this agency is run by LGBTQ youth for LGBTQ youth. So they train LGBTQ youth on peer-to-peer support. So whether it's through text or whether it's through talking on the phone or whether it's through direct messaging or instant messaging, you can connect with them and somebody on the other end will also identify as a youth and also identify as being LGBTQ. And with them, they've also been doing a lot of support for two-spirited folks. So they have a program called the Peer Youth Ambassador Program, and so that's for different parts of Ontario, run by LGBTQ youth to try and support different programming or supports or try to get service providers to understand and become more aware in different parts of Ontario. And for this cycle this year, for their second part, they've hired a lot of their youth are all two-spirit. So it's nice to see like that agency who's not a two-spirit agency, see the importance of giving back and having two spirits have that empowerment and like even with just employment. And so that's the one thing. And like going back to what my grandmother said of giving back, no matter what you can, when you can, how you can do it. And if there was more people who would have stood up for me growing up, I think my life would have been very different. But I'm also very thankful for the life that I have now, because if I didn't have the life that I live, then I probably wouldn't be having this conversation with you all today. So I'm very thankful for that. And youth, just hold up. And if you need to fight, just fight. And if you need to burn down that system, just find other helpers, because other people want you to find help too. So you're not alone.
All right. Does anybody have questions?
I have a quick question and a comment. I'm really glad for you kind of sorry?
Naomi, just give me 1 sec. I'm just gonna turn off. Did you want me to turn off the recording?
Oh, it's okay.
Okay,
it's fine. I just wanted to say thank you so much for sort of addressing your feelings on indigiqueer versus two-spirit, because like myself, I identify as indigiqueer, but I feel cisgender, so I always feel like maybe it's inappropriate to use two-spirit and sort of also being away from ceremony. So I'm really glad that you talked about that. I just wondered if you could say again the person's name who you said sort of launched the term two-spirit.
Oh, okay. So her name is Myra Laramie, and she's an Anishinaabe knowledge keeper in Winnipeg, Manitoba. So
thank you.
Yeah, so she's still around, and it's actually really great because those international two-spirit gatherings still happen. It was supposed to be hosted this year in Saskatchewan, but unfortunately was canceled because of COVID. So hopefully we'll see it in the new year. But the one year I was able to attend, the first year I was able to attend was in 2018, and Myra Laramie was also there to provide teachings. And it's the one thing about those gatherings too, if you get the opportunity to go, especially for youth are able to go to that, to those gatherings. There's usually scholarships available. So if folks have access issues to money for travel costs, sometimes they'll pay for those travel costs with some of their grants if they have access to them. And it was great at the 2018 gathering because I think one of the largest gatherings here on the Canadian border. And because there was over 100 people there. And I think like one of the youngest people we had in Circle who identified as two-spirit was like 9 or 10 years old, among some of our elders and among people from all different walks of life. So it was just really great to see that representation there. So that person's name was Myra Laramie in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Anishinaabe.
Okay, maybe
No, No problem. Oh, and also to mention too, the person who originated the term indigiqueer was a Two-Spirit visual artist or videographer by the name of Thurza Cuthan. So you can YouTube Thurza or find her on YouTube, and she's really awesome. And it was basically she was attending a queer film festival in 2014, I believe, and she just entitled her film indigiqueer. She spelled it a bit differently from then. And then since then, I think it was like a couple of years later or something, she saw it being used in like an academic paper. And she was like, I'm not academic. Where do they find, I love seeing that those people are still using that language, but I didn't think it was going to be found in an academic paper. So yeah, so Thurza Cuthan would be the person who also originated indigiqueer too.
Anybody else have any questions or?
No, well, with that being said, I do want to say Chimigwech, and thank you so much for inviting me to your tea time. And I've definitely enjoyed myself here, and it's really good to meet a lot of you. And if folks want to follow me on social media, I'm always posting different events or opportunities or information relating to LGBTQ awareness or Indigenous awareness or Two-Spirit items of interest.